Hey, good morning and welcome to Lockdown with Lon, Day 5. I wanted to pick up again in 1 Kings chapter 17. I'm going to stay in verse 8. I know it was in verse 8 yesterday. I'm going to stay in today because I want to catch the second sentence there. I'll read all of 1 Kings 17:8, and it says, Arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and dwell there. And then he says, Behold, I have commanded a widow there to feed you. Now this is God speaking, so I want to pay attention to that and see what God is wanting to say there. And so remember the story that he's running away from Ahab and Jezebel. He was down by the brook and he was fed by the ravens there, and the brook dried up. Now he's saying, go on to Zarephath. And then he says, Behold. So that's a pretty important word. When God says, behold, it's like God saying, hey, check this out. I want you to pay attention to this because this is going to be an important thing. So he says, behold, I've commanded a widow to feed you there. So God takes, I think the important thing to note there, the first thing I want to note there is that God, he's commanded a widow to take care of Elijah. You know, a widow isn't necessarily my first choice. If I'm looking for someone to take care of me, I want to go stay with someone who's, who maybe is wealthy, who has a lot of resources, who maybe has some influence, who could maybe it's someone who send me to a soldier who has other soldiers who can protect me or something. But actually, God chooses a very ordinary poor widow to look after Elijah. And so why does God do that? Why doesn't he use a king or a commander or a soldier or someone like that? Why does God choose this ordinary poor widow to look after him? And I think what God is trying to do here is he wants to use something very ordinary to do something extraordinary, because often we can see if we can explain it, or if it makes sense, or it fits in with our paradigm, then we won't give God the credit. We won't give God the glory. We may not even be able to see that it's God that's doing what he's doing in his life. And God likes to use really ordinary things. Case in point, ordinary things to do extraordinary things. And in fact, in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 27, it says, Behold, God has chosen the foolish things of the world to that he might shame the wise, and chosen the weak things of the world that he might shame the strong. Again, God does that because he wants us to see his hand at work in our lives. He wants us to know that it's him. And if he came in with this extravagant, obvious, makes a lot of sense kind of solution, then we might not see it. And he wants us to see it. Why does he want us to see it? Why does he use a poor widow? Why not use a rich ruler? And I believe it's because God wants to give us the privilege of a testimony. I mean, how awesome is it when we get to testify? Man, I was in lockdown. I didn't have a lot of money in my bank account. I didn't know how I was going to feed my family. I didn't know what was going to happen with our country, with our government, with our economy. Man, I didn't know what was going to happen, and God came through. Man, I remember, I can tell so many. I can share so many testimonies with you of how God brought our family to live in South Africa and to be a part of the ministry here, and how he showed himself in such extravagant ways, but through ordinary means, through ordinary people, through ordinary circumstances. He gave us testimonies, and those testimonies they're such a privilege to carry a testimony like, man, God said this, we believed him, and then he did this. It's such a privilege, and there's such power. I think the second thing there is that there's a power in the testimony that we can almost lean on it, we can rely on it, we can look back on it, we can see the faithfulness of God in the testimony. I remember I was talking to my friend Chris once, and I said, Chris, how do you do it? How do you keep the faith over years and years and years? And he said to me, he said, I just remember the faithfulness of God. Man, I look back over my life and I see where God's been faithful in the past. I look at my life now and I see where God is being faithful. And I look at And I can't help but believe and know that if God's been faithful in the past, he's faithful in the present, he's going to be faithful in the future. So there's a power that comes through the testimony of God using the ordinary to do the extraordinary. So this morning I want to encourage you to look for God's provision in the little things. And then the second thing I noticed there, which is really interesting to me, because if you read on this story, when Elisha does meet the widow, she doesn't seem to have any clue that she is going to be the one that takes care of Elijah. In fact, she's getting ready to just, give up and go die. But it says, God says, behold, I commanded a widow there to feed you. And so I looked up that word commanded because it doesn't make sense to me. If God had commanded her, how does she not know? But that word can also mean appointed. That means that God actually had appointed or assigned her or set her aside for this task. God had it, he planned it, even though he kind of didn't let her in on it. And I think that's a really cool thing, as we see that sometimes God will appoint others to be our helper, our I want to say salvation in times when they don't even know it. Like, how many times have you gone and you've been like, you really needed a job and some random, business owner or manager gave you a job and they had no idea that they were going to be appointed for your salvation. I remember one time we had planted a church and we were in, really in real financial hardship, and through a series of random encounters, I met a guy who would become my business mentor when I was in the business world, and it's like God appointed him to teach me how to do business and to be successful at it. And he had no idea then, and he has no idea now, the impact that he had in our life. And sometimes God will do that. He'll appoint people who sometimes don't seem like they're going to be your salvation, but they are. And then the other side of that coin is, how about you? How about the times where God's appointed you to be the one and you didn't know it? And I think it's important for us to keep that in mind, to keep that in the way we approach the things that we find ourselves doing. Is, hey, has God appointed me to be the salvation for someone else, to be the means that God's going to work in someone else's life? Has he appointed me to feed someone who can't feed themselves? I mean, do you have a neighbor right now who may be elderly, maybe single mom, that they might not say that they're desperate, but maybe God's going to speak to you and say, hey, go bring that person a meal. And maybe it's going to be an opportunity for you to share the gospel with that person. Or maybe there's someone in our congregation and that they're hurting, and you can slip out and drop a parcel on their porch, or you can meet them at a grocery store, or maybe you're just called to be the one that is going to give them a call and encourage them today. I want to remind you that we are called to be a priesthood of all believers. And we as elders we're reaching out to the congregation, and we're wanting to make sure that everybody's doing great. Our community leaders are reaching out. Our deacons are reaching out. But God's called us all to be priests. God's called us all to take care of our community, our congregation. So who are you going to reach out today? Who are you going to call and just say, hey, how are you doing? Or encourage or pray for or get a word for? We have to continually remind ourselves that we're called to be priests. This could be a time where we just sit back and sort of there's all these resources online I'm just going to sit back and I'm just going to feed myself. I'm going to read my Bible. I'm going to worship. I'm going to be by myself and just feed myself. But who's God called you to give to today? I don't think God fills us up just so we can be full, but he fills us up so we can give out. So I want to encourage you to ask God, have you appointed me today to feed someone? Physically, spiritually, emotionally, all those things. And then the third thing I picked up there is that, he says, I've appointed a widow there to feed you. And in Luke chapter 29, let me get to that real quick, and I'm almost done. Where is it? Oh, I know where it is. Hold on. Luke chapter 29. Luke chapter 12, verse 29 says, And do not seek what you are to eat and what you are to drink, nor be worried, for all the nations of the world seek after these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, seek his kingdom, and these things will be added unto you. And again this morning, I know I've probably said it a couple of times already, but I just want to encourage you this morning to seek his kingdom. What does that look like for you this morning? What does it mean to seek his kingdom? I think what it means for us in this situation is to not focus our attention on our circumstances, not to focus our attention on our fears and our worries and our questions. I mean, I have questions just like you do, like how long are we going to be locked in? You know, when am I going to be able to go see my daughter in California, who I haven't seen in a while, and who I'm missing, and who I was supposed to go see in 3 weeks, and I can't go now because we're locked down. We all have these questions that are kind of swirling around in our heads, and you know, what's going to happen in this country when this virus really takes hold? I mean, that's a concerning problem. But God's saying, hey, don't worry about those things. Don't worry about the stuff that I've got. You know, I'm in control here. You seek my kingdom. And that's what we need to do. We need to seek his kingdom. I keep using that word reset. And I want to tell you this morning, we've got to make sure that we're focusing on the reset. So I got my 3 questions today. I forgot to give them to you tomorrow, so I apologize for that. But I've got 3 questions for you today. So if you have a piece of paper, I want to encourage you to write these down and spend some time just between you and God, or spend some time with your family talking about these things, or get onto a Zoom and talk to a friend or your community group about it. But here's some questions that you could be asking. First of all, how has God demonstrated his faithfulness through ordinary means in your life? Like, I want you to think about that question. Like, how do I know God's going to be faithful? Well, because I can look behind me and see when he's been faithful in the past. So I want to spur you to think about those times. You know, maybe it's just as simple as looking around your house. You have a house. You're not living on the street. Hey, you have some sort of Wi-Fi or data because you're watching this. Hey, hopefully you have some food in your pantry. You've got a bed to sleep in. You know, you're wealthier than the vast majority of the world if you've got those things. So those things are actually physical representations of God's faithfulness. Second question I have is there someone in your life today for whom you can be God's appointed provider? Again, going back to that, who can you reach out to today and be a priest towards? And then finally, the third question is, what does it mean for you to seek his kingdom? What does it mean for you to reset? And again, some of my questions, I know that we're touching on these things, but I really want to hammer these things home. I don't want us to miss what God has for us. Hey, God bless, and keep looking out of the Josh Gen and 412 websites for content. Be careful that you don't let yourself be swayed by every wind of doctrine. Let's be faithful to the Apostles' doctrine, to our 412 and our Josh Gen websites. And God bless you. Have a great day.